December 6th, 1969, 6:28 p.m. Altamont Speedway, Northern California. The sun was gone. 300,000 people pressed against a 4-foot stage. The Rolling Stones were halfway through Under My Thumb, and 18-year-old Meredith Hunter, wearing a lime green suit, pulled a long-barreled revolver from inside his jacket and raised it toward Mick Jagger. He never got the shot off. A Hells Angel named Alan Passaro saw the gun, lunged from the stage, parried the weapon with one hand, and drove a hunting knife into Hunter's back. 5 times. Hunter staggered. Other angels swarmed. They stomped him into the dirt while the band kept playing, 15 feet away, oblivious in the strobe lights. By the time the song ended, Meredith Hunter was bleeding out on a torn cardboard box. Time of death, 8:05 p.m. Cause of death, stab wounds to the upper back, with massive blunt force trauma to the head and chest. This wasn't a concert anymore. This was the death of the 1960s. And the men holding the knives had been paid in beer. You have to understand who these two groups were. The Rolling Stones in 1969 were the biggest rock band on earth. Mick Jagger was 26. Keith Richards was 25. They had spent 2 years cultivating a dark, occult, dangerous image. Their new album was called Let It Bleed. Their last single was Sympathy for the Devil. They wanted to look like outlaws. The Hells Angels were the real thing, founded in 1948 in Fontana, California. By '69, the Oakland chapter was run by Ralph Hubert Barger, Jr., known to everyone as Sonny. 40-something, lean, ice-cold, a former Army paratrooper turned full-time outlaw, Barger built the Angels into something the FBI would eventually classify as an organized crime enterprise. And in December of '69, the Stones decided these were the perfect men to guard their stage. This is the story of how the world's most famous rock band crossed paths with America's most violent motorcycle gang, a free concert that killed 4 people, a teenager murdered 15 feet from the microphone, a 6-year assassination plot against Mick Jagger that almost ended in a hail of bullets off the coast of Long Island, and a feud born in the mud of a California speedway that the FBI quietly tracked for nearly a decade. This is the real story behind the Hells Angels and the Rolling Stones. But here's what most people don't know. The relationship didn't start at Altamont. It started a year earlier, in London, with Keith Richards opening his front door to a man covered in road dust who said the magic words, "I'm an angel." To understand how the Stones ended up trusting the Hells Angels with their lives, you have to go back to 1968. London was the center of the counterculture universe, and the American Hells Angels, specifically the San Francisco and Oakland chapters, had become folk heroes to the British rock scene. Hunter Thompson's book, Hells Angels, had come out in '67. The Angels rode with Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters. The Grateful Dead treated them like brothers. To a generation of musicians who romanticized rebellion, the Angels weren't a gang. They were the cavalry. The Stones bought the myth completely. In December of '68, they filmed The Rock and Roll Circus, a now famous television special. The audience was hand-picked. Beautiful people, fan club winners, and a small contingent of visiting American Hells Angels in full colors. The Stones loved having them there. To Mick and Keith, the Angels weren't dangerous. They were authenticity in leather and denim. So when the Stones planned their 1969 American tour, the biggest comeback tour in rock history, they wanted that same energy. The tour was a juggernaut. 23 cities in 28 days, sold-out stadiums, tickets reselling for $15 and $20, which was real money in '69. By the time they reached the West Coast in late November, the Stones had grossed over $2 million. But there was a problem. Critics were savaging them for ticket prices. The press called them capitalist phonies. The counterculture, the very people who had made them stars, was turning on them. Mick Jagger needed a grand gesture, something free, something massive, something that would prove the Stones still belonged to the people. The plan was simple. A free concert in Golden Gate Park, San Francisco, on December 6th. The Grateful Dead would help. The Jefferson Airplane would play. Santana, Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. The whole San Francisco scene. It would be Woodstock West. The plan fell apart in 72 hours. San Francisco officials refused permits. A backup site at Sears Point Raceway demanded $125,000 in distribution rights from the Stones' concert film. With less than 24 hours to go, a third site was secured. Altamont Speedway, a rundown, oil-stained dirt track 45 miles east of Oakland. The owner, a man named Dick Carter, agreed for free, hoping the publicity would save his failing business. The crew had one night to build a stage. They built it 4 feet tall. 4 feet. At eye level with the crowd. No barricades, no buffer, and then came the question of security. Here is where the story turns. The Grateful Dead's road manager, Rock Scully, suggested the Hells Angels. The Dead had used them before at Bay Area shows. The deal, by every credible account, was struck quickly. The Hells Angels, around 100 members from various Northern California chapters, would sit on the lip of the stage. They would keep fans from climbing up. They would protect the equipment. In exchange, they would receive $500 worth of beer. Not cash, beer. Stacked in a refrigerated truck behind the stage, Sonny Barger himself, decades later on radio, said it plainly. He said the Angels were not hired as security. He said they were asked to sit on the stage, drink beer, and keep the kids off. He said anyone who thought the Hells Angels would work as security guards was, in his words, dumb. By dawn on December 6th, 300,000 people had descended on Altamont. The crowd was wired on bad acid, cheap wine, and amphetamines. Brown acid was circulating. The same brown acid that had caused problems at Woodstock, only worse, because the chemists in Oakland were less careful than the ones in upstate New York. The Hells Angels arrived at sunrise on a column of motorcycles. They rode straight through the crowd, parked their bikes at the foot of the stage in a tight semicircle, and started drinking. By noon, they were drunk. By 2 p.m., they were beating people. The first acts went on. Santana opened. During Jefferson Airplane's set, lead singer Marty Balin jumped into the crowd to break up a fight, and an angel knocked him unconscious with a single punch, on stage, on camera. Paul Kantner accused the Angels from the microphone. An angel named Bill Fritch grabbed another mic and threatened him back. The Grateful Dead arrived, saw the violence, and refused to play. They got back in their helicopter and left. The Stones were now headlining a concert that had already turned into a riot. Mick and Keith waited until after dark. The temperature dropped into the 40s. The crowd compressed. The Angels, now fully drunk on $500 worth of beer for over 12 hours, were swinging weighted pool cues, sawed-off pieces of lead pipe, and motorcycle chains. When the Stones finally took the stage just after sunset, the violence intensified. During the second song, Sympathy for the Devil, fights broke out twice. Jagger stopped the music. He pleaded with the crowd, "Brothers and sisters, why are we fighting?" He sounded 26 years old and terrified, because he was. Then came Under My Thumb. Meredith Hunter was 18 years old. He lived in Berkeley. He was a young black man at a concert that was almost entirely white. He had come with his white girlfriend, Patty Bredehoft, who was 17. He wore a bright lime green suit and a black shirt. Earlier in the day, he had been beaten by Angels and pushed back from the stage. He went to his car and retrieved a .38 caliber Smith & Wesson revolver, documented at trial. He came back. He pushed toward the front. Witnesses say he was high on methamphetamine. The autopsy confirmed it. Just after 8 p.m., as the Stones launched into Under My Thumb, Hunter pulled the revolver from his jacket. Footage from the documentary Gimme Shelter, filmed by the Maysles brothers, captured the next 4 seconds in detail. Hunter's arm extends. The gun is visible. Alan Pissarro, a stocky angel from the San Jose chapter, sees it. He vaults from the edge of the stage, grabs Hunter's gun arm with his left hand, pulls a knife from his belt with his right hand, and stabs Hunter in the upper back 5 times. Other angels descend. They kick. They stomp. Witnesses said one angel placed a trash can over Hunter's head and beat it. Hunter was dragged to the rear of the stage. He bled to death on a sheet of cardboard before an ambulance could clear the crowd. The Stones kept playing. Some accounts say they didn't know. Some accounts say they were told and pushed through anyway, because stopping might have caused a stampede that killed dozens more. They finished the set in 45 minutes and were helicoptered out. Behind them, they left a body count. Meredith Hunter, stabbed and stomped to death. A young man named Leonard Krell, 17, drowned in a drainage ditch. 2 more, Mark Feiger, 22, and Richard Savlov, 22, killed in a hit-and-run when a car drove through the campsite. Hundreds were injured. $6.5 million in damage, and the rock and roll dream of the 60s, the one that started in Haight-Ashbury, was finished, buried in the dust of a speedway 45 miles outside Oakland. But the Stones thought it was over. It wasn't. It was just beginning. In the days after Altamont, Mick Jagger gave a press conference. He blamed the Hells Angels. He said the violence was their fault. He said the Stones had been deceived about who they were. On a San Francisco radio station KSAN on December 7th, Sonny Barger called in live during a discussion with Stones members. What he said on that broadcast became legend in Angels circles. Barger said the Angels had been hired to protect the equipment. He said when people started messing with their bikes, parked at the foot of the stage, the Angels did what angels do. And then he said something colder. He said Mick Jagger used him to look hip and dropped him when it got rough. Barger said, on the air, that he was no peace creep. He said if Jagger wanted to put it on the Angels, then Jagger had a problem. That problem became a death sentence. In 2008, the BBC released a documentary called Crime, Inc. In it, retired FBI Special Agent Mark Young, who spent over a decade investigating the Hells Angels, revealed for the first time that in the years following Altamont, the Hells Angels put Mick Jagger on a hit list. They tried to kill him, more than once. The most detailed attempt, according to Young, occurred in 1975. Mick Jagger was staying at a beach house on Long Island, New York. The Hells Angels learned the location. A boat crew loaded with armed angels left from a Long Island marina. Their plan was to come ashore from the water, cut through the back of the property, and assassinate Jagger inside the house. They believed it was the one approach his security could not anticipate. According to Young, a violent storm hit the coast that night. The boat was swamped at sea. Multiple angels were thrown overboard. They survived, but the operation was abandoned. Mick Jagger never knew. The FBI learned about the plot from a confidential informant inside the Angels years later. They never told Jagger directly. They kept it inside the Bureau until the documentary aired 33 years after the fact. Think about what that means. From 1969 forward, one of the most famous men in the world was being hunted by an organized motorcycle gang with chapters in every state. They didn't forget. They didn't forgive. To the Hells Angels, especially the Oakland chapter under Sonny Barger, Mick Jagger had violated the most fundamental code of their world. He used them. Then he sold them out on television. Now you might ask, what about Alan Pissarro, the angel who killed Meredith Hunter? He was arrested in 1970 and tried for murder. The trial began in San Rafael, California. The Maysles brothers' documentary footage was the main evidence. The prosecution argued that Pissarro used excessive force. The defense argued that Pissarro saw a gun pointed at the band and acted to save lives. After 17 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for 13 hours. On January 14, 1971, they returned a verdict: not guilty, self-defense. Pissarro walked out a free man. He went back to riding with the Angels. Then, in 1985, his body was found floating face down in a reservoir in Anderson, California. He had $13,000 in his pocket. The death was officially ruled accidental drowning. Nobody in the motorcycle world believed it. The case has never been solved. Meredith Hunter's family received nothing. He was buried in an unmarked grave in Skyview Memorial Lawn Cemetery in Vallejo, California. For 36 years, there was no headstone. In 2009, fans raised the money for a small bronze marker. His name, his dates, 18 years on Earth. Killed at a Rolling Stones concert. The Stones never publicly acknowledged the assassination plots. Mick Jagger has spoken about Altamont a handful of times in 5 decades of interviews. He has called it a disaster. He has said the band was naive. He has never said the Angels' name with anything but ice. In 2021, on the 50th anniversary, the Maysles brothers' film Gimme Shelter was re-released. Critics called it the most important rock documentary ever made, not because it captured a great performance, because it captured the exact frame, the exact second, when the dream of peace and love died at the end of an angel's hunting knife. Sonny Barger died in 2022 of liver cancer. He was 83. In his autobiography, he stayed cold on the Stones to the end. He said Altamont was their fault. He said they hired the wrong people for the wrong job and then blamed the wrong people for the consequences. He never apologized for Meredith Hunter. He said Hunter pulled a gun and got what was coming. The Hells Angels, as an organization, took the same line for decades. What Altamont really proved, what the 6 years of FBI assassination intelligence really proved, is that there is a difference between playing the outlaw and being one. The Rolling Stones were performers. They wore the leather. They sang the songs. They invited the danger because danger sold records. The Hells Angels were the actual product. When the show ended, the Stones flew home to London. The Angels stayed at Altamont, drinking the last of the beer, with a dead teenager on the cardboard behind them. That is the line. That has always been the line. One side gets to leave. The other side is the consequence. 4 people died at Altamont Speedway on December 6, 1969. One of them, Meredith Hunter, 18 years old, in a lime green suit, became a name in rock history not because of who he was, but because of who killed him. The man who killed him died face down in a reservoir 16 years later with $13,000 in his pocket. The men who plotted to finish Mick Jagger were stopped by a storm in the Atlantic, and the Stones kept touring for another 50 years, the richest rock band in history, while the Hells Angels kept riding, the most feared club in America. 2 empires built on the same image, the same myth, the same lie that the outlaw is romantic. Until one night in California, when the music stopped and the knife went in, and everyone learned the difference. If you found this story fascinating, hit subscribe. We drop a new mob and crime documentary every week. Drop a comment below. What dark chapter of rock history should we cover next?